fading.
Okay, here we are. We're back to our history of the Jewish people. We are up to lesson number 10. We just began talking about the sale of Joseph, and we will shortly continue with Joseph's journey down into Egypt and his story there. But interestingly enough, the Torah now interrupts, and it interrupts a very interesting story. In synopsis, the essence of this story is that Yehudah, who is like a prince amongst his family, right? He's the one who had suggested, let's not kill him, let's sell him, about Joseph. And shortly after, when he was sold off, I remember I spoke last time that once Joseph was sold, that enmity between the brothers had disappeared. It was gone. And so it had served its purpose of getting Joseph on his way down to Egypt. But as soon as he was sold, the enmity was gone. And of course, when they came to their father and showed him the bloody coat and said, "Do you recognize the coat?" So his pain was tremendous. For 22 years, he mourned Joseph just like it was fresh. The blessing of time in recovery didn't work because there was no death. So he felt it like fresh for 22 years. And as the brothers realized that the father's pain and everything else, they did tshuva. They had a lot of remorse. And part of the of course, we go all the way back in the Torah to the creation of Adam and Chava, and they ate from the tree of knowledge. And God said, "What'd you do?" And Adam's first response was, "The woman that you gave me told me to eat," right? So always blaming someone else. So the brothers at that point, they all felt that Yehudah was responsible for the sale of Joseph because he's like a leader amongst them. And if they had said, if Yehudah had said, "Let's just return him to his father," they would have done what he said. So Yehudah gets blamed for all of this. So now he kind of separates himself from the brothers, and we have a story about that now, the story of Yehudah and some challenges there. And then we'll go back to the story of Joseph. So the story, we're going to talk about Yehudah and Tamar. It's a very interesting story. And the essence of the story is that Yehudah loses his wife, and he goes off on a business trip. And on a business trip, he meets Tamar, who is actually his daughter-in-law, but his sons have died. She's in disguise, and he is drawn to a relationship with her. They have that relationship, and then she's accused, when she becomes pregnant, she's accused of harlotry. This whole interesting story develops, right? And so we have to ask the questions like, number one, why here? Why are we stopping the story of Joseph to go on to this story? And what we're going to find is that there's a correlationship, a number of correlationships that go on between the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife and the story of Yehudah and Tamar. There's some relationships there. And we'll also see that Joseph is being sold into slavery. Again, we talked about it last time. Joseph is being sold into slavery as part of a much bigger picture. The story of Yehudah and Tamar is also part of a much bigger picture, spanning generations. And so we have to be aware of that aspect as we go into this. The truth is that as we start going into our exile, because Joseph going down to Egypt is the beginning of the prototype of all exiles that we're going to face. So before we get there, God wants to interrupt with the cure. Because we always like, God always provides the cure before the malady. And so the idea is that God is showing us that there's going to be a redemptive factor even before we get down to Egypt. The relationship of Yehudah and Tamar, seeming illicit, and yet it is from the relationship of Yehudah and Tamar that we will get the entire lineage of King David, and of course also of Mashiach. So the Messianic times, the light of Mashiach, the spark of that happens right here even before we get into the story of Joseph and going down to Egypt, the spark of Mashiach begins right here. And then once we already have the cure of all of our ailments in process, at least in the seedling process, now we can continue on the journey down into the exile itself. And just as we talk about, Joseph is going to have this challenge between Potiphar's wife trying to seduce him, and we have the story here. The essence of both of these women, their motivation was righteous. They both had a certain prophecy that their seed is supposed to come forth from here, from these men. So Potiphar's wife thinks that she has to have relationships with Joseph for all that to happen. In truth, it's her daughter. It's her daughter who will marry Joseph, not her. But she has that level of prophecy, so she thinks she has to do something about it. In the case here with Tamar, she's 100% right. She's 100% right, is that she is supposed to have children from the tribe of Yehudah, who will then be kings of Israel. But she thought it was the son. So let's go into that story, right? So Yehudah took himself a wife. After he left from the brothers, he took himself a wife. And it's interesting that the Torah mentions here the life of that he marries a Canaanite. Now, that ought to bristle every hair on your body, because we know from Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov, they all said, do not marry a Canaanite, right? They're cursed. They come from their descendants comes from the cursed son of Noah. And the Jewish people come from Shem, which is the blessed son of Noah, and they shouldn't mix. So it can't be that she's actually a Canaanite, but she's making that reference because, and the Targum Onkelos, when translating Canaanite, actually translates merchant, that he married the daughter of a merchant, and as he translates that because it's clear that she had to not have been a Canaanite, exactly because that wouldn't have happened. So this must have been someone from Canaan, but not a Canaanite, right? Someone who'd come there and had grown up there, but was actually not originally from there. So Yehudah's wife, she bore 3 sons, Er, Onan, and Shelah. Er, Onan, and Shelah. And Yehudah's sons, they could have been the forebearers of kings, because Yehudah is the royal tribe, right? But they made poor choices. Er was the oldest son. He married a righteous woman. Her name was Tamar, a very righteous woman. She was actually, there's questions again on her lineage, but unfortunately, generally explain that she was from the daughters of Noah's sons Shem. So not in the direct lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also from the line of Shem, the son of Noah, the blessed side, right? She was as beautiful as she was modest. Her husband, Er, was afraid that if she became pregnant, she would lose her physical beauty, and therefore he defiled himself, and he spilled his seed, not allowing her to become pregnant. Now, that's one of the cardinal sins of the Torah, because the intention of getting married, the intention of having male and female, is to have progeny that will settle the world and make the world a better place. That's the purpose, right? And so he married her without fulfilling the purpose of what marriage was about. And God punished him with an early death. Well, now that he's passed away, so Yehudah understands this idea of the Levirate marriage, the idea that the oldest son passed away without any children, his wife should be married by the next oldest son, and that they'll have children, and the son that's born from them will be named after the original husband to carry on that lineage, that side of the family. So he now has to bury one son, and he has to give his next son to the daughter. It's interesting, we reflect back on divine providence, that nothing is by accident, right? It's it's Yehudah who had said, to sell Joseph off, and Joseph was lost. And the pain he caused his father, that his father had to lose a son, now follows up to Yehudah. Yehudah loses a son because of what his involvement in the loss of his father's son, Joseph, right? So Yehudah says to his second son, you need to marry Tamar, your older brother's wife, and fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum, which is to raise up a child. So Onan agrees to take Tamar for a wife, but he had the same thought process of his brother, not to mar her beauty by her becoming pregnant. And so he too was punished with an early death. And now Yehudah has lost two sons to this wife, to this woman. And so obviously he's very reluctant. The third son is still too young to get married. And so he responds, you'll wait for the third son to grow older. You're not going to marry him just yet.
You would think that he would be hesitant, because back in those times, unless he had some kind of insight that Tamar was not the factor that the two sons died early.
As I said, he was definitely hesitant to do so, and he said, you'll wait. He told Tamar, you'll wait and see when he grows up. And as he grew up and he came older, she saw that he was not given to marry her. So even though Yehudah had said, you'll wait till he grows older, he never did give the youngest son to Tamar to be married. Now, Tamar she was a holy woman. She was a very holy woman. She was a very modest woman. And she, in the entire time she had been married to her two husbands, in her father's household, she kept herself completely veiled. So he wouldn't recognize her. So he wouldn't know who she is. She was that modest. She was a very modest woman, very righteous woman. And so she had been but she knew from this level of prophecy that she should have children from the tribe of Yehudah, and she wants to have children from the holy tribe, the kingly tribe. And so she's now, to no fault of her own, the two first sons have died, and she was waited for the third son. He wasn't given to her even when he became of age. So she decided to take matters into her own hands. When Yehudah's wife had passed away, and now he was a widower, he was going away on business. Tamar went ahead. She went to the crossroads that he would be passing, and she took off her garments of widowhood, of bereavement, and she unveiled herself when Yehudah came past, and he was drawn to her. He was very attracted to her. Now this is one of those situations where we talked about Joseph's brothers hated him, and as soon as he was sold off, their enmity was dissolved, right? So Yehudah didn't have this desire for her before. All of a sudden he does. And he doesn't even recognize who she is. So he asks her, are you, do you have a faith in one God? Are you one of the Canaanite people? No, she had become a follower of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but she's from the family of Shem. Are you married? No. Did your father promise you to somebody else? No, I'm an orphan. So he says, so he's still interested. And she said, what are you going to give me if I'm going to say yes here? And he says, I'll give you a goat, a young goat from the flock. But in the meantime, I can give you a pledge. And so she said, give me your signet ring, your cloak, and your staff that you have. And those will be a pledge until you send me the goat, right? The young kid. So, why is she saying these things? The signet ring is a remez, a hint to the prophecy of kings. The cloak is to the prophecy of the members of the high court, the Sanhedrin, who will be born to the family in the future. And the staff is a hint to Mashiach, who will also come from this lineage. So that's what she asks for. Interestingly enough, it's again we see the foreshadowing from before. He messed around with his father by showing Joseph's coat dipped in a goat's blood, and now he's saying he's going to give her a kid from a goat from the flock, and that's going to come back and haunt him as well. So Yehudah performs at that time the idea of a marriage at that time, because again this is all before Mount Sinai, right? So at that time the idea of a marriage was you took a woman into your home and you were intimate, and that was a marriage. That's all you needed, right? But he gave her a ring, so that was again significant of the foreshadowing of a ring being a marriage as well. So essentially he marries her and he's intimate with her, and then he goes off on his business trip, and when he gets back to the house he sends a messenger with the goats for the payment, and to retrieve the other three things. When the guy gets there, nope, she's not there. No, the guy goes and doesn't see anybody. She's not there. He goes and asks the local people, was there such and such a harlot who used to be at this corner, whatever. They said, I don't know what you're talking about. Never was, hasn't been, no. So there was no way he could trace it down to see what had happened. So he tried to be honest with it, but it didn't work. So a few months later, he gets word that his daughter-in-law, the widow, is now expectant. It's clearly evident that she's pregnant. So obviously a misdeed has happened here. So she's called to a bezdin, to a court. The court is Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Yehudah. So it's Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Yehudah, 3 generations of the family of Israel right there. And they sit judgment on this woman who's quiet. And they pass judgment that because she was destined to be married in Yibum, so it's like adultery, and adultery is punishable by death, and she should be burned by fire. Why by fire? Because she coming from the family of Shem, which was the priestly family of that time, and so therefore the punishment for some harlot within the Kohan, for the priestly tribe, is death by fire. She remains silent because she does not want to put Yehudah to shame. So she remains silent. What she does is she sends a messenger with the ring and cloak, and the ring and cloak and staff, and she says, tell the judges that I'm pregnant by the man to whom these belong, and I will not publicize his name even if you burn me. So now, obviously, Yehudah recognizes those. He now knows what happens, and he's that this internal struggle of, he's now ashamed. What does he do? He's not publicly ashamed, but he is ashamed now because he knows what really happened, and it was his fault because he didn't give the third son, which he was legally bound to give. He did not give to her, and therefore this is what she did, and he gets it, right? So he's privately ashamed. Does he have the courage to go public? And he does. He does actually, to his credit, he goes public and he publicly states that I recognize those things. And again comes the word recognize, right? He's punished by exactly what he did. He went to his father and produced a cloak and said, do you recognize this cloak? And his father felt that Joseph had been killed and murdered. And so now he's getting the same words back to him. Do you recognize this cloak and signet ring and staff? And so he says, yes, I recognize those belong to me, and it is my fault that she is pregnant, and she is actually now married to me because I did not give her over to my son to marry, my youngest son to marry. Again, a heavenly voice speaks up, and a heavenly voice comes out and basically says that because you spoke up so that no one would be harmed, so too will your descendants, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they will be saved from the furnace by God in a special miracle because of the merit that you spoke up, and that did not allow her to do so. Tamar went on in her pregnancy, and she gave birth to twins. Now here's what another story that happened before, right? We remember that when Yaakov and his brother were born, right? Yaakov was the first one conceived, but Esav was born first, and then there was a struggle between them, right? So here, what happens is that as they were being born, one of the twins stretched his hand out. The midwife tied a scarlet string to that wrist to designate first, right? But he ended up withdrawing his hand, and the second child came out first. So again, we see like Abdesa, right? And therefore, the first one that was born was called Peretz. Peretz means the one who broke forth. Peretz means breaking boundaries. Peretz, breaking forth. And the one that was born afterwards was called Zerach on account of the shiny red thread, the scarlet thread that had been tied to his hand. But again, we have this question of the big question that comes out. We see that the seed of Mashiach comes about in this strange manner, that two of the sons died and the third one wasn't given, and she marries Yehudah himself, but she does it in secrecy, and then she has children, and there's twins, and the twins, one is bursting forth before the other. And just like the first twins, Esav and Yaakov is the one that produces the future of Mashiach, and so too here, of these two, it's Peretz, the second one, who burst forth first, but Peretz is really the second one. Peretz is the one who also then becomes the progenitor of who will bring out Mashiach in the future. And so we have to ask this question. Mashiach is such a lofty idea. The Malchus Beis David, the kingship of Israel, King David, King Solomon, the whole lineage of kingships of Israel will be in the Davidic dynasty. How is it that this whole story of the Davidic dynasty, the kings of Israel, begins in such a tainted story? Such a tainted story. And so our sages teach us that, again, God is preempting that, yes, there will be kings of Israel, but they will be humbled by the backstory of their own lineage. That the kings, the Davidic dynasty, will also always be reminded that their heritage comes from a seemingly promiscuous relationship, and that's where Mashiach comes from. So God has set ahead the humility that will come with the Davidic dynasty is already prepared.
Isn't there another factor that's shown here? That the second son, it seems like in most of the stories in Parshas, when we're talking about people with gifts and connections to Hashem and things like that, it's not the first son, the one who inherits the family and rules the family, but it always seems to be the second son that provides the special progeny. That's
so it is a conundrum here, because the firstborn is typically, by Jewish law, he's given a double portion because he's had double the difficulties and double the responsibilities of everyone else in the household. And yet there are unique circumstances like Yaakov, like Peretz, where the second-born actually ends up having a special relationship. But that is not the common. That's a unique distinction. It's not the norm. The norm is always the firstborn son who becomes the Kohen for the family, but he loses that status. The firstborn son loses that status after the whole sin of the golden calf, which they were involved in. So our story of Yehudah and Tamar ends here, and our next class will go into continuing the story of Joseph at that time.